Good evening and welcome back to Barchester. Thank you for everybody who has been supporting this so far. I hope you have enjoyed the start. I'm enjoying reading it. It's very different from Bernie though, so I'm finding just getting into even Trollope's sentence structure and style of humour and expression different, I guess. So yeah, I'm enjoying it, but sometimes I get halfway through a sentence and I realise it's ironic. And there's a lot of free and direct speech, which is when you have a sentence that says so-and-so said, and then it goes on, and it's not in direct speech, but instead of just reporting what they said, it's also reporting it clearly in their voice. Jane Austen was really the person who started that technique of free and direct discourse. But Trollope does it a lot. And so how do you read that? Do you read it as if you're reading it in the voice of that character, or are you reporting it as the narrator? It's quite tricky to do. Anyway, it's always good to have new challenges. That's what 2020 is all about. So let's continue. Chapter 6, War. Good heavens! Exclaimed the Archdeacon, as he placed his foot on the gravel walk of the close, and raising his hat with one hand, passed the other somewhat violently over his now grizzled locks. Smoke issued forth from the uplifted beaver as it were a cloud of wrath, and the safety valve of his anger opened and emitted a visible steam, preventing positive explosion and probable apoplexy. Good heavens! And the Archdeacon looked up to the grey pinnacles of the cathedral tower, making a mute appeal to that still living witness which had looked down on the doings of so many bishops of Barchester. I don't think I shall ever like that Mr. Slope, said Mr. Harding. Like him? Roared the Archdeacon, standing still for a moment to give more force to his voice. Like him? All the ravens of the close cawed their assent. The old bells of the tower, in chiming the hour, echoed the words, and the swallows flying out from their nests mutely expressed a similar opinion. Like Mr. Slope! Why, no, it was not very probable that any Barchester-bred living thing should like Mr. Slope. Nor Mrs. Proudie either, said Mr. Harding. The Archdeacon hereupon forgot himself. I will not follow his example, nor shock my readers by transcribing the term in which he expressed his feelings as to the lady who had been named. The ravens and the last lingering notes of the clock bells were less scrupulous, and repeated in corresponding echoes the very improper exclamation. Improper exclamation. The Archdeacon again raised his hat, and another salutary escape of steam was effected. There was a pause, during which the precentor tried to realise the fact that the wife of a bishop of Barchester had been thus designated in the close of the cathedral by the lips of its own archdeacon, but he could not do it. The bishop seemed to be a quiet man enough, suggested Mr. Harding, having acknowledged himself his own failure. Idiot! Exclaimed the doctor, who for the nonce was not capable of more than such spasmodic attempts at utterance. Well, he did not seem very bright, said Mr. Harding, and yet he has always had the reputation of a clever man. I suppose he's cautious and not inclined to express himself very freely. The new Bishop of Barchester was already so contemptible a creature in Dr. Grantley's eyes that he could not condescend to discuss his character. He was a puppet to be played by others, a mere wax doll done up in an apron and a shovel hat, to be stuck on a throne or elsewhere, and pulled about by wires as others chose. Dr. Grantley did not choose to let himself down low enough to talk about Dr. Proudie, but he saw that he would have to talk about the other members of his household, the coadjutor bishops, who had brought his lordship down, as it were, in a box, and were about to handle the wires as they willed. This in itself was a terrible vexation to the Archdeacon. Could he have ignored the chaplain and have fought the bishop, there would have been at any rate nothing degrading in such a contest. let the Queen make whom she would Bishop of Barchester, a man or even an ape when once a bishop would be a respectable adversary, if he would but fight himself. But what was such a person as Dr. Grantley to do, when such another person as Mr. Slope was put forward as his antagonist? If he, our Archdeacon, refused the combat, Mr. Slope would walk triumphant over the field and have the diocese of Barchester under his heel. If, on the other hand, the Archdeacon accepted as his enemy the man whom the new puppet bishop put before him as such, he would have to talk about Mr. Slope, and write about Mr. Slope, and in all matters treat with Mr. Slope, as being standing in some degree on ground similar to his own. He would have to meet Mr. Slope, the idea was sickening. He could not bring himself to have to do with Mr. Slope. "He is the most thoroughly bestial creature that ever I set my eyes upon," said the Archdeacon. "Who? The bishop?" asked the other innocently. "Bishop? No, I'm not talking about the bishop. How on earth such a creature got ordained? They'll ordain anybody now, I know. But he's been in the church these 10 years, and they used to be a little careful 10 years ago. Oh, you mean Mr. Slope. Did you ever see any animal less like a gentleman? Asked Dr. Grantley. I can't say I felt myself much disposed to like him,